Good afternoon. My name is Michael Roberts. I'm founder and CEO of Warrior to Citizen, your host for today's webinar. We're an Atlanta-based company, nonprofit, and we're celebrating a decade of serving our military and first responders. I'll give you some background on me. I came out of Special Forces, Ops, and the intelligence community. And after 26 years, I realized that we need to do something with our soldiers returning. We started that journey with Warrior to Citizen, which was rooted by all of our clear understandings of the personal challenges that warriors face while they're integrating into society. I've come to understand the similarity of the military experience and that of first responders. And in particular, what interested me at the time, and still does, is the issues of the family. Families deal with the same emotional roller coasters in many respects as do the soldiers, Marines, airmen. Warrior Citizen serves both of these communities, the military and the first responder communities, from a perspective of dealing with the family and whole. Let me share a little more on backdrop. Between 2008 and 2010, with the assistance of chaplains, volunteers, we interviewed over 4,000 returning veterans from Afghanistan after multiple deployments. The result of that research led to the creation of an all-volunteer enterprise, teaming agreements, and with academic and national thought leadership help, we published and began delivering evidence-based psychoeducation, coaching, counseling, and programs that served both military and first responder families. That was in 2014, we launched our first program. We strive to help families successfully cope with stress, stating marriages, careers, and lives. Our programs have restored trust and built resilience in family units. These programs address divorce, moral injury, suicide, child trauma, and support in some cases of suicide prevention and even interventions. All the programs are designed with a family systems approach and are provided at no charge to all military and first responder families. The programs are delivered in one-day workshops, extended live and virtual multi-day weekend retreats, all offering the ability to reinforce lessons learned and an opportunity to take advantage of optional therapeutic sessions. We are grateful for you attending this webinar, and we're privileged to have you participate and share your valuable time with us today. We thank you for your interest in our webinars and interest in America's heroes as their families struggle to meet the new challenges post-pandemic. For further information about our programs, please go to our website or Facebook at info@warriortocitizen.org. In finality, today's objective is to share perspectives and questions about the challenges of the pandemic at a family level, provide some insight to how you might adjust in that new normal, and perhaps provide a sense of control and gain a more positive attitude. So without further delay, let's get into the program. Let me introduce our moderator, good friend, on the board of directors for Warrior Citizen, Major General Doug Carver, former Chief of Army Chaplains, and now the Director for Chaplaincy at the North American Mission Board. Doug, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Glad to be here today, and good afternoon and welcome to everyone who's attending our webinar today. This is our second webinar in a series entitled Strengthening Our Military Veterans, First Responders, and Their Families During the COVID-19 Pandemic. Today's topic will focus on finding the calm in the storm. I'd like to give a special thanks to our panelists, whom I'll introduce in just a moment. And again, thank all of you for attending today's event. I know it will be a very rewarding time for you. A few administrative instructions. Number one, we are taping this webinar, and all of you who have registered will have the opportunity to go to a link sometime after today's event. Secondly, all of you, if you've not found out already, you are muted. But if you have a question for the panelists, there should be an instruction, a chat at the bottom of the page where you can just simply select chat to type in your question. First of all, I'd like to introduce Russ Brown. Russ is a chaplain in the Army National Guard. He's a high school English teacher in the state of Pennsylvania. He has nearly 30 years of experience as a pastor and a military chaplain. He and his wife, Amy, have been married for 36 years. They have 3 children and 12 grandchildren. Russ, welcome.
Thank you.
Dr. Kenneth Lukun is an author, speaker, intervention advocate, and a United States Army Reserve chaplain. Lou serves as the Special Projects Liaison for Behavioral Health Link and the Georgia Crisis and Access Line. He's also the founder of Armed Forces Mission and the Intervene Challenge. Dr. Kuhn has conducted more than 1,200 suicide interventions and the training of over 17,000 individuals in Department of Defense, various law enforcement agencies, local churches, and civic organizations. Lou, welcome.
Good afternoon.
And then we have Dr. John Wheeler, a former Navy SEAL, a Christian counselor who focuses on healing trauma that's often experienced by veterans, first responders, and law enforcement. He specializes in the area of moral injury, and he has a doctorate in counselor education and a master's degree in theology. Dr. Wheeler is an adjunct professor at Mercer University and Richmond Graduate University. He teaches also various courses that revolve around military veterans and counseling psychology. Welcome today, Dr. Wheeler.
Good to be here. Thank you.
John, I would like to start with you with your Navy background. As I recall, during farewells or toasts at Navy gatherings, sometimes at funerals, at retirements, there's an old saying from a poem that basically says to the individual, I hope that you have fair winds and following seas. That's a blessing, that life will be smooth, that it'll be calm, that the currents, if you will, of life will work in your favor, that the individual will experience a calm life. I actually looked up that word calm just to see exactly what that word means and what we're out after today. It's a 15th century word, which basically means to be windless, W-I-N-D-L-E-S-S, smooth, easy, no agitation, no frustration, no pressure. I'm reminded of the words of Jesus Christ in the Gospel of John, where he says, in this world, you're going to have trouble. So as I reflected on today's gathering, I thought to myself, the idea of a calm life is almost an oxymoron. So John, is finding calm, is that even possible in such a chaotic, surprising, storm-filled life in which we live, only exacerbated now by the coronavirus pandemic? Would you like to speak to that, please?
Sure. So is finding calm possible? Of course it's possible, but is it perpetual? I mean, is it going to always be calm? Is it always going to be perfect? No, unfortunately, that's just the reality we live in. We live in a world where we're going to experience both the calm and the wind. We're going to have seasons, if you will, to where things are going to be perfect, where things are exactly the way we want them. And we're going to have seasons where they are just horrible. You know, life is going to throw incredible buckets of water on your parade time and time again. And that's just the reality, you know. So yeah, we're going to experience the good times and we're going to experience the bad times. And, you know, your question really does segue into, you know, how do we deal with the bad times? Because, you know, we're all good at handling the good times when the good times are here, but when the bad times happen, you know, how do we deal with that? How do we find the calm in the storm? Because really anticipating, expecting, and I guess feeling like you're entitled to a perfect life where there are going to be no storms is just not realistic.
Yeah, thank you, John. Lou, would you like to respond to that as well, please?
Yeah, I think that I think about soldiers taking leave. You know, they have to take leave. It's necessary. I think about Jesus distancing himself and going off alone Why did they do that? Because they were in the middle of storms, they're in the middle of a war, they're in the middle of a crisis. But we have to, somewhere along that line, find the time to break away from that and find some calm. If we don't, we become a risk to ourselves and other people.
Thank you, Lou. Russ, how about yourself? If you could respond to that question.
Sure. So often when we're in the midst of the storm, it's kind of hard to figure out which storm it is that's weighing on us. It's the stress of losing a job, and then that we get in a fight with a wife, and so by finding calm and learning the techniques that help you find a calm, it helps you pause for a moment and actually figure out what the storm I'm in the middle of and what can I fix and what can I address and which direction should I go.
Thank you, Russ. You know, it's possible, this is for all three of you, that our veterans, our first responders, and their family members, they've had everything but a calm life with deployments and responding to tragedy or to trouble or whatever. So another question that might be important to the audience as we dig a little deeper today is, you know, what has driven you personally to devote your life to help others finding a calm in the sense of the storms of life? And Russ, I'd like to start with you on this one, please.
Sure. You know, I like many people, you read at the beginning, my wife and I have been married 36 years. It's not been all great days. Yeah, we've had some really tough times. I like to joke that we've been married 36, or we've known each other for, let me see, how do I do this? We've been married 36 years, 34 of them have been happy. We went through a couple of years of really tough times. And what we experienced was getting help, getting through the difficult times has allowed us then to celebrate 25 years of really great years afterwards. So I guess for me, it is knowing that if I can help people get through the storm, often life after the storm is so much better.
Certainly. Thank you. Lou, how about you? If you'd respond to this, especially you've dealt with so many people whose lives have been in turmoil because of suicidal ideations or family members having to respond to a completed suicide. If you could speak to that as well, why have you devoted your life to this area of helping find calm in the midst of a storm?
Well, if I can go back 10 years ago, I would never have known that I would be in this position because I was in the real estate field. I wasn't even in the Army. I had gotten out of the Army. Never thought I'd put the uniform back on. And when the economy crashed in 2008, I lost friends to suicide. I contemplated suicide myself. And it was actually my oldest son, who was an airman at the time. I had made the decision to go back into the military under less than honorable conditions. I was actually hoping to deploy with a deployable unit in the hopes that I might die in the desert. And it was my son who came to visit me at Fort Jackson. And he asked me the question that nobody had ever asked me. He said, "Dad, are you thinking of suicide?" And that was a wake-up call for me because that's what I was contemplating. And so the reason that I do what I do today is because I've been there. And I'm reminded of that saying. I can't remember who penned it, but I don't follow anybody who doesn't walk without a limp. And so I had to go through that limp stage in order to understand why people struggle, how people struggle. And then that's what's given me the passion to do what I do today.
Thank you, Lou. I appreciate your honesty about that. John, yourself, here you are devoting yourself now to a different level with your focus on moral injury and helping people find a calm when they're trying to deal with some of the emotional and moral scars in their soul wounds. So why have you devoted yourself in this particular area?
Well, I mean, for me, it's simple. I mean, I believe that we were called to serve. Servitude is probably the purest form of expression as a human, you know, and from a, you know, obviously I'm a Christian counselor, and from that regard, you know, servitude is really one of the things that makes us whole. When we are, you know, there's approach in psychology, it's called Adlerian, and when you're basically focusing on outside of yourself, what's happening with you tends to take care of itself pretty healthily. And, you know, and that's an example of servitude. And I believe that when we are serving others and we are focusing on dealing with other people and their issues, that we become just a happier, satisfied person in general. So, you know, for me personally, in a way I could say it's selfish. You know, I'm doing it so I could feel better. But in a way, it really is what I believe we're called to do. And it's just a process of becoming more whole and becoming more satisfied in your existence, quite frankly.
Yeah, you know, all of these are important. Some things I've just heard you say, that there's a satisfaction in this, helping those who are struggling to find that calm. There's an empathy that we all must feel as we look to see those souls that are struggling around us, sometimes even within our own loved ones and our family members. And then I think, Lou, what you mentioned, maybe Russ as well, we're all wounded healers in some respect. We do lead, I believe as Dan Allender said in his book, we lead with a limp. And so I just want to say thank you for the fact that you and your spouses, you've done this together. You've devoted your life in this particular area where it is so very, very important. And even more so perhaps since March the 18th. Let me read you a quote. 2 months ago, the World Health Organization issued guidelines for protecting our mental health during this pandemic. Here were their thoughts. Avoid watching, reading, or listening to the news that causes you to feel anxious or distressed. Only seek information that helps you take practical steps to prepare yourself and your family for protection and plans for the future. Seek information updates only at specific times during the day, once or twice. For the constant stream of breaking news reports about the outbreak can cause anyone to feel worried, overwhelmed, and in a constant state of disequilibrium. And so in some respects, as we talk about finding calm in the midst of the storm, we're really kind of working on information overload. So John, I'd like to ask you, how do we find calm when it seems like from news reports and from what we're hearing through the media that everything is out of control? How do we find that calm?
Well, I mean, you basically said it right there toward the end. You know, things feel out of control, and you know, one of the most important things that you can do is really understand what the concept of control really means. We go through our lives every day trying to get control of things, get control of our relationships, our job, our career, our needs, and so we really put a focus, perhaps even an unhealthy focus, on the concept of control. And when we talk about control, you know, it's important to, I guess, understand what they refer to as locus of control. And locus is just a fancy name for location. But where's the location of your personal control? So if you feel that you have authority, and you have the power of choice to make decisions, you're demonstrating an internal locus of control, because control is either internal or external. But if you identify that outside of you, either somebody or something has some power that they're making decisions, and as a result, you feel like you're in a place where you have no options, or you're a victim, or you have no authority or personal agency, then that's what they call an external locus of control. And so it's important that we try to identify and acknowledge where our control is, and literally try to move to an internal locus of control, because when we start exercising our power to make decisions and control our destiny, if you will, we move from a concept of control to a concept of choice. And that is one of the most significant things you can do in regard to finding calm. You ask, you know, how do you find calm? Well, you start with addressing your concept of control and try to exercise an internal locus of control. And when you do that, your reality does change from a concept of control to a concept of choice. And the most important thing that I guess I could say here is that from our understanding of control, control is an illusion. Control is a lie. The way we understand control is a complete illusion. You give me one example that you think that you're control of, and I can give you a counter example to demonstrate that you're not in control. And so from that very point right there, control is a lie, but there is a truth. The truth is choice. We all have the power of choice. So regardless of whatever scenario we're in, be it the COVID-19 that we're dealing with now, the everyday trials and tribulations of life, fair winds and following seas that aren't so fair and aren't following. Whenever we're dealing with that, we have the power of choice on how we're going to respond to that. You know, there is when I was in the teams, one of the more common phrases that we used to use all the time was embrace the suck, you know, because it's just going to suck. What you're about to go through right now, it's just going to suck. And when we came to the realization of, okay, well, it's going to suck, you know, this is not going to be good. It gave us a sense of power because we realized, okay, well, we know what we're dealing with. We were not going into it under the illusion that things are supposed to be okay all the time. And we didn't have to deal with that anxiety that comes up when things don't turn out okay. So again, you know, that's how, you know, and from my personal perspective, that's one of the core ways that we can find the calm, is that we look at control, we identify our own personal control and try to move to an internal locus of control. So,
You know, it would seem to me that you could make some positive or negative choices as you're trying to be in control of a situation. I think of sexual abuse cases where in many cases individuals begin self-mutilation or other self-destructive habits or actions, either alcohol or drugs. In many cases, it can lead to suicidal ideation. So Ken, could you speak to that as far as people, in some cases, is a suicide an issue of control or a bad choice? Let's carry this a little bit further.
Yeah, that's a great question. Suicide for many people is they feel like that's their last option. And it's the only thing that they can control because many times they feel like their life is out of control. Even the self-mutilation that you were talking about, that's not necessarily a sign of suicidal ideation, but it is an attempt to have control over one's life. That's the only pain that I can control. And so that's a struggle for many people with suicidal ideation. Taking their life is the last act that they have the ability to do anything about. Everything else, as you guys have mentioned, is totally out of their control. So they can control when they end their life, and that's their thought process.
Russ, would you like to speak to this? I know you're also a pastor of a church, and you probably have some individuals that come into your counseling struggling with issues of control, or because their life or maybe their spouse or their children are out of control. So can you address that as well, please?
Well, a lot of what we need to take a look at is what we choose to think about and how we choose to think. So often with so many conflicted feelings and so many conflicting fears, so many conflicting priorities, it's important to take time and not let your feelings overwhelm you and not let your fears overwhelm you, but take time to consider and ponder. You know, prayer is a important thing, and so allowing God to lead you, not to give in to your fears, looking beyond the immediate, look to the consequences, look to the circumstances, and as was mentioned earlier, maybe not be in the news. Don't stop believing what the world is saying, and find out what is really going on. Do some investigation, do some study, and find out where the risks are. And I guess coming around to it is taking a look at where you're getting your truth, where you're getting your understanding, and not letting your feelings take over.
You know, we had this discussion yesterday, John. I think you and I were talking about once you understand this whole concept and the power of control, that literally you can make some choices and perhaps establish equilibrium. There seems to be a stressor, if you will, between the letting go and letting God, which is an issue of control, letting God have it, versus just throwing in the towel and giving up. So there's a tension here. So can you sort of speak to that for the audience, please?
Sure. So, the phrase, let go and let God, it sounds really good. Like, okay, I'm going to stop trying to take control of this, and I'm going to let God take control of this. But however, when you use the phrase letting go, let it go, it can oftentimes be synonymous with giving up. The whole phrase, let go and let God, that's kind of, it kind of gives the impression like, okay, well, you don't have any responsibility in anything now, because now you've just handed it over to God. But we still do, even when we do let go and let go of the control, we still have a responsibility to move forward in a very wise way and make wise decisions, and using the abilities, the God-given abilities to choose and make decisions as wisely as we can. So when we speak to let go and let God, again, there's still a sense of personal responsibility that we have to embrace there. So I don't know if that's answering your question exactly.
No, it isn't. And I guess that's a great a segue into that is how do we help people gain a sense of responsibility for some of these storms that they're in, either voluntarily or involuntarily. We could take marriage relationships. We could take the military. Hey, my recruiter lied to me, and here I am eating sand in Afghanistan or somewhere in Southwest Asia. How do we help individuals as they're dealing with some control issues, but there's some responsibility there as well? Rush, if you could speak to that.
Well, so often what I try to do is help people not so much look backwards. I mean, let's face it, this is the reality. Now, where are we going to go from here? We can get them to accept responsibility, or they choose not to accept responsibility. But the point is, tomorrow is going to come. The sun's going to come up, and how are we going to make tomorrow successful? So, okay, your recruiter lied to you, but you're still in. So where are we going to go from here? And when you can get people focused on moving towards tomorrow, then it helps, in my experience, it helps overcome the frustration of today.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because in a lot of the definitions I saw on calm, which had to do with the sea, there's an issue that you don't stay docked the entire time. You were actually, there is movement implied. Life is about movement. I think I would be concerned if we were just stagnant in life. And I'm sure that you've probably all heard stories. Hey, this is my story 20 years ago, and it's still the same one today. Lou, would you like to speak to this issue of helping individuals take responsibility within this whole concept of a chaotic world, the control issue, and then making positive choices for positive growth?
Sure. I think kind of piggybacking on what Russ was just sharing, I think a lot of the struggle that we have is because we want answers to the questions. And we live in a moment right now with this COVID. What's going to happen tomorrow? What's going to happen to my job? What's going to happen to my wife's job? Are my grandparents going to be sick if I get around them? Am I risking their lives by being around them because I've been out in public? There's so many questions, and a lot of times the questions overwhelm us. It's just like sitting down to take a test in high school or in the university. We get that 100 questionnaire test, and we look at it initially and we're overwhelmed by it. But one of the things that I often share with people, and this is kind of piggybacking on what Russ was saying, life is full of questions, but some questions are full of life. And so I want to look at the questions that are going to move me toward the positive rather than trying to drive the car from the rearview mirror. I've got a much larger screen or much larger window in front of me than I do a rear view mirror. So I want to go forward, and that means sometimes I have to be comfortable with the questions. The material that you'd sent me today about C.S. Lewis, I've already read half of it this morning. The mystery and the paradox, and how do we become comfortable with that and allow that question to just be there without having to have an answer. I don't have to have an answer right now. Right back in the woods back here, my son and daughter-in-law live. They've got a little 4.5-pound baby that was just born 2 weeks ago that's finally come home. They've got a lot of questions, but they're okay with having those questions. We don't know what tomorrow holds. None of us do. And so those questions have to be kind of there without the answer necessarily being there at the present time.
Well, now we're getting into the whole topic or subject of, as a Christian, I would say we're getting into the area of faith or the not yet. And again, so now if we don't have the answers, it's maybe one of those wait out, or I'm going to jump out of this perfectly good airplane as a paratrooper, never jumped before. I may have some questions if it doesn't open, if I'm still alive. But how does faith, or another word, trust, how does that fit into this whole area of control and choice and responsibility, John?
Well, it's what you were saying there. We don't know what's coming. We don't know. I mean, I saw an article just the other day, yesterday, and it was specific to the COVID-19, and it read something to the sense that people's anxiety is up because they just don't know what's going to happen in the next few weeks or later this year, and it was in context of the COVID-19, and perhaps it's going to pop back up in the fall, and perhaps a new strain is going to develop, and but that really is sort of a microcosm to life. That's just our reality. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen before this webinar is over with. I mean, I could kill over in a heart attack, and I didn't see that coming. So, I mean, there's really no way that we're going to be able to control that. And that's really what that is. It's control. What's important, though, is that we have the confidence, the assurance, and as a Christian, I can relate this back to my relationship with Christ. But even if it were not, it's having a sense of confidence, knowing that whatever's going to come my way, I'm going to be all right. I'm going to be able to deal with it, and I'm going to be able to move forward, because I can't control what's coming, but I can control how I'm going to deal with it. And really developing that idea, that mindset, if you will, is really paramount to not just having a healthy psychology, but just living life. Because when you believe that you'll be able to deal with whatever happens, wherever it is, then you'll find yourself in a place that is not just empowering, but it's freeing. It's freeing.
What's interesting, we all love our kids and our grandkids. And I know that I could speak for all of you that I want to ensure that my kids and grandkids do not have to face some things that I've faced, and that they don't have to deal with the storm. And all of a sudden, if we avoid our spouse, our children, our troops, our first responders from dealing with some of these storms, they could become codependent. They will not be functional. They could be I guess the question is, how do we ensure that they learn those lessons that sometimes you can only learn them as you go through the storm, where there are some residual things that come as a result of us fighting the fight of faith, so to speak. Russ, would you speak to that one?
Well, so much of the way we teach our children anything is by modeling it and being a good example. So how we handle the storms of life will teach our children how to handle the storms of life. The reality is, what I've learned over the years is that people can pretty much handle just about anything if they know it's coming. It's the surprises that throw us off. If I told you were going to get cancer a year from now, you'd say, man, that's really awful. But then you'd set out to say, okay, how are we going to do this? But if you get that diagnosis tomorrow, then it's a surprise and you don't know what to do with it. So, the question is, what are your sources of strength? Where are your sources of hope? And as we demonstrate that and show that to our children and teach those things to our children, leaning on each other, the brotherhood of being in service together, the brotherhood of Christians together at church, what family is supposed to be, leaning on each other, all those things. That's those, and then ultimately our faith in God. Those are our sources of strength. And when we teach our children that, we make them more resilient.
Thank you, Russ. Lou, let me throw this over to you. The importance of accountability partners or the brotherhood or sisterhood, your peers who are there to stand with you as you confront the storm, either because they've been there so they can give you some life lessons, or they are saying, hey, I got your back. Can you speak to that one, please?
Yeah, I think the word you used earlier when we prefaced this question, I think you used the word avoid. We start avoiding people. And it's a paradox. We need help, but we start avoiding people. That doesn't make sense. It's interesting here in Fayette County, where I work and operate and live every day. We got 10,000. If I can include Coweta County, we got 20,000 veterans that live in Fayette and Coweta County. And it's interesting. A lot of them will call me up because they're still seeking community. And they've been used to 20, 30 years in the military, and they had community, they had support systems in place, and now they're in a civilian environment, and they're looking for community. And I have had so many phone calls in that regard. A lot of people avoid community because they've been hurt. But one of my comebacks with that is, yeah, community hurts us sometimes. But it's also in community where we can find healing. We need people who are willing to stand with us. A paper that I just read recently, I think you had sent it to me, as far as the faith community, how the faith community people are able to handle the economic stressors a little bit better because of that community aspect that they have in their lives. And when they're all alone, they don't have anybody to walk with them through that struggle. And so it helps to have somebody walking with you through the journey. Not that I understand everything, but that I'm not alone.
John, in your past life with the SEALs, obviously you understood the importance of the brotherhood and your battle buddy and accountability partner. Whether they had a faith, whether they were religious or not, there was something that I'm sure that people glean through just the strength of walking with one another to the point that you are, if you will, willing to lay down your life for your battle buddy. Could you speak to that strength that comes from being with someone at, one?
Right. It's an incredible bond. It truly is. And personally, that's one of the things that I struggle with, transitioning from active duty military to the civilian life. It was an unpleasant realization that I would probably never meet or have the quality friendship and bond that I had with the guys that I operated with as a SEAL. I mean, because, when you go through these events that are, life-threatening, events that are challenging, and you create a bond that's almost, it's hard to articulate, quite frankly. And it is so strong that when you're removed from that environment, you remove yourself from that environment, and you go into another environment where you don't have those same experiences that act as catalysts to create such a strong bond. It's something that a lot of veterans, men and women who are coming out, who are struggling with, because it's hard to find your battle buddy. It's hard to find in my case, a swim buddy, and have that bond that existed when you were actively operating and running and gunning. It's totally different, and it is a challenge. It presents a significant challenge in respect to the transition for our veterans today.
Yeah, and one of the struggles is they re-enter civilian life. There's a book by Sebastian Junger. It's called Tribe. He said, while you're in the military, or perhaps while you're in law enforcement or first responder, you learn the power, the value of a tribe, the sense of belonging. You wear the same uniform, you have the same customs, you know all of the acronyms for your particular field. And when you go out of that, to take that uniform off, you're still looking for that tribe. That's something that's very difficult. I have a question here from one of our first responders. Let me go ahead and throw this one out. My wife struggles with me being around people, but I'm just doing my job. How does one balance between doing what I'm supposed to do with my job and the guilt I feel for doing something that she tells me is causing her and the family great distress? Who would like to take that one? Russ?
the thought came to my mind that this is the same thing that we deal with when families, when soldiers go away on deployment. It's this, I have my duty, I have what I have to do, it's what I signed up for, it's what I trained for, it's who I am. And yet my going and doing that is causing stress and anxiety to my family. And there's not an easy answer. The reality is this is the truth. So it's being honest with your feelings and helping her deal with her feelings.
And at least having that discussion, certainly. Lou, would you like to speak to that? You work a lot with law enforcement. I'm sure this question has come up before. You know, and some spouses never know whether or not their loved one's going to come back home after the duty.
Right, and even in the work that I do, I don't carry a weapon. I'm still a chaplain in the military, but in the civilian setting, I carry a badge, but no weapon. There's been times at 3 o'clock in the morning when I've gotten a phone call that there's a veteran in crisis in the park, and I get the call. I'm headed down there. My wife doesn't know if what the situation is. I've been told there's a weapon on hand, and she doesn't go back to sleep that night. If I come back at 8 in the morning, she's been up since 3 o'clock, and she was beginning to experience vicarious post-traumatic stress from what I was doing. And it's the same with military. It's the same with law enforcement. I've got my youngest son is a fireman. During this COVID situation, he's still living at home, but he's been coming home since the end of March and pretty much isolating himself in his room, won't come out, struggling with that. So parents struggle with it. Spouses struggle with that question. And it's not, as Russ said, it's not an easy answer. It's not an easy answer, but within community, and that's the power within the military community. When spouses go off to war, they have that support, that network there. We're all kind of in the same boat, so to speak, and we're sticking together, and we're going through the same storm, and we're not alone. And that's what's so powerful to me. To use the illustration from the Bible, when everybody else had forsaken David, there was one mighty warrior who stood with him back to back, and they routed their enemies and they won the day. So it really, really helps to have somebody who's going through that with you, to know that you're not alone.
Thank you. You know, it would seem to me also, especially first responders or our troops, especially those in the special community, John, this would be the importance of ensuring your loved ones are aware of the protocols, that when deployments take place, that they're aware that you are trained, if you will, that the equipment works, that there is a protocol and there's preparations that are made so that your loved one is not in the dark when you step out of the house to go to a danger storm or a potential, you know, a big problem. If you would speak to that one, please.
Well, I mean, in regard to the question that was asked, I'm struck most by the word guilt. You know, especially in regards to, you know, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. All of these things are in play. So I take note of the emotion there of guilt. You know, what is that about? Where is that guilt coming from? And it really does come down to communication between the spouse and himself, because if he's doing everything that he's doing, and it's his job, and he feels it's his job, and he feels it's righteous, that he's doing the righteous thing, and only he can answer that. I would be curious as to know kind of where that guilt is coming from. And I do believe that it is an issue that is going to be sorted out and revealed in regard to honest communication with the spouse. Because obviously she has her concerns, she has her fears. She, nobody wants to have their spouse go out into an infested place, a COVID infested place, and bring that back home. And then you've got potential issues with the family. So obviously, she's probably coming from that sense of fear, which can be translated into anger. So anyway, I believe that, in regard to that question in particular, the guilt is what I find most interesting, and would think that it would be resolved in regard to communication with the spouse.
I think of some first responders and veterans that I've met who would also, though, communication is key, but it might be along the lines of, hey, you can't handle the truth. You don't have a need to know. So where's, again, that balance with when you have a spouse who needs to peek in as much as they can to your life. And like you said, there's probably some other questions. Is there guilt? Is there fear? Is there a sense I may lose my loved one? And this, again, is what we're all about in these discussions, the importance of communication between our first responders, our veterans, and their families to keep those communication lines open. Let me go to a question that we've sort of been skirting around, but I think we've come to the point, life is not always calm. We do have storms. It's chaotic. There's some issues of control and choice that need to be made. What are some ways in which we can personally find calm for these storms all around us? And let me mention, this morning, I had a pastor of a church basically say, my people are afraid to come back into the building, even though we can, it's clean. We're doing all of the 6 feet and all the mask, but they're afraid to come in. And so they're still dealing with chaos. What are some ways to find calm? So Russ, I'm going to start with you.
Piggyback off of where the last conversation is, I think it's important to have the discussion with that fearful spouse and the guilty feeling person, soldier, first responder, whatever. I had those discussions before the event. I mean, you talk about these things ahead of time, and then when something like COVID happens, it allows us to make a parallel to deployments or those things. If you wait till you're in the middle of a crisis, in the middle of a pandemic, then emotions are running high, and it is harder to find the calm. So I think it's important for families to establish good communication skills ahead of time. And the same way with John and I were talking earlier about therapeutic skills to help you find calm. For me, one of the major things that helps me is prayer. You can translate that to meditation if your faith is different. But especially, I like to pray through the acronym ACTS, ACTS, the book of Acts: adoration, confession, thanksgiving, and supplication. And as I find myself going before God and praising God through adoration, confessing my sins, confessing where I feel like I'm falling short, giving thanks for the many, many blessings that I have. By the time I get to asking for stuff, my list is pretty small. So I find that brings peace, and I found that to be helpful with a lot of soldiers over the years.
You know, if you were to go out and Google, find calm for the storm, it's quite interesting. The number of hits that have to do with prayer, spiritual disciplines, meditation, inner peace and calm. It's so very, very important. John, how would you again speak to ways in which you can find calm?
Well, apparently we keep using this phrase piggybacking. I'm going to piggyback on what Russ just said, especially in regards to prayer and Acts. There's a fifth part of Acts, and it's called R, and that's reception. And reception is it's the least known, if you will, but it's probably the most important. And that's actually listening. And because we go into prayer, a lot of times, I've always said this before, for a lot of us, prayer is about gimme, give me peace, give me what I need, give me supplication for the things that I'm struggling with. But a lot of times we kind of just ask, and then we hang up and we get on with our lives, and we don't take the time to actually sit there for a second and actually receive what might be coming from the Lord. And so a lot of times, listening and being still, as we've all talked about before, as it said in the Bible, be still, is critical. It's huge in regard to prayer as a whole, because you would be surprised, perhaps, finding that peace, going into that sense where you're just silent, and see what comes into your mind that you may not have even thought about before. And that in and of itself is God responding to your prayer in many cases. But again, that does kind of tie into kind of meditation and relaxation, so that you're there, so you're not distracted, and that you are sort of at peace. And you know, and I'll just kind of run with this for a second. There's different ways to go ahead and find the calm. You know, from a therapeutic standpoint, there's some specific techniques that are pretty effective. You know, the first technique is breathing. You know, a lot of times, you know, our first responders, our veterans, who are always in these stressful situations, one of the simplest, easiest, yet most effective things to do is breathing exercises, and they're not hard. I mean, there's one breathing exercise in particular that's pretty effective. Don't necessarily agree with the number scheme here, but it's the 666, and that's basically your breathing in for 6 seconds. You're holding your breath for 6 seconds, and then you're letting it out for 6 seconds. And you do that about 3 times. You do that set for about 3 times, and you relax, and then do it again. Do another set of 3 or something like that. And breathing is incredible because it literally affects your physiology. And what I mean by that is literally the chemicals in your body begin to change and affect how you feel. Endorphins are getting released. And it really is a very immediate and effective way to find calm. And of course, like you said, meditation and journaling is really good. Journaling some of the things that you're dealing with. You can journal in a way that's very structured, you know, where you're dealing in specific of the things that you're dealing with, but you can free flow as well, and just put out onto the paper things that are going through your mind, and then you can come back and look at it. And then finally, bibliotherapy is a good way too. And that's really psychoeducational in a way, where you get more information, more accurate information on the different things that you're dealing with. In this case, that would be the COVID-19. And I think we spoke to that earlier, but it can also be PTSD, it could be anxiety, it could be depression, it could be any one of those things. Actually getting more accurate information of what that is really does help empower one to take control of that and going back to positive, powerful choices.
Thank you, John. Lou, do you have something to add to this?
You know, it's interesting. I work with a lot of law enforcement, training them in suicide intervention. And one of the questions that I always ask is, what is your protocol? What's your standard operating procedure for your vehicle on a daily basis? Do you have to keep the tank full? And everyone that I've worked with have said, you know, our standard procedure is we fill the tank up at the beginning of the day, we fill it up at the end of the day. Sometimes we fill it up in between. The point being, we don't wait till we're empty and thinking that we can continue the chase because we're running on fumes. So we don't, and that hits home for me too, because I've been married 34 years. The first 2 years of my marriage, my wife had to come get me on the highway 3 times in the first 2 years because I would push it past zero. I actually got 30 miles past zero one time. I was really going for it. But she finally, after the 3rd time, she said, I'm done. You'll just sit here if you don't keep your tank full. And then I found out from a mechanic, you don't want to ever really do that anyway. It's not good for your fuel pump. So now I fill the tank up when it's halfway empty. And the same application applies for law enforcement, for the military. We got to take time to fill our tank. And it's not a selfish thing. A lot of times, you know, we're all of us on this panel, we're caregivers. And we think it's selfish sometimes for us to stop because we've always got to be helping people. But if we don't take time to help ourselves, and my son reminded me of that when he came to Fort Jackson from Charleston Air Force Base, went through the whole duty day with me. And at the end of the day, he said, Dad, get your gym clothes on. We're going back to the gym. One of the things that he recognized was I was not going to the gym, and he knew that was important. And I had stopped doing what was important to me. So he reminded me to do the things that take care of me Because if we don't, we won't be able to take care of our families.
You know, what's interesting, what you're saying here, Lou, is that, sometimes storms actually come so that we can have this self-reflective time. And hopefully over the last 8 weeks of the COVID shelter in place, where everything has technically been unplugged, we've had the time to do some self-reflection. As Richard Swinson would say in his book, Boundaries, are we a few quarts low on our physical fitness, or our emotions, or our communication with our spouse and loved ones? It's been an opportunity for us to do a self-check, and hopefully we have individuals in our life that can help us do that as well through accountability. We've got time for one more question, and Russ, I'm getting to that one, and again, I'm segueing into it. I think we've all come to the conclusion that life's about storms. In this world, you're going to have trouble. Jesus Christ said, rain is going to fall on the just and the unjust. So storms are an equal opportunity employer, so to speak. Why is it that we expect that we're not going to have any problems? And if we do, that, God's zapping us because we've done something wrong. Can you speak to that one? And we might have a chance to go to the other two panels, but I'm gonna leave you with this one.
Yeah, very quickly. The other half of that verse says that he also brings the sunshine on the good and the evil. So the fact is, life does have ups, it has downs, it has good things, it has bad. So often it's a matter of what you're looking for. You see what you want to see. I'm a public school teacher. I teach high school, and in my classroom, I have a sign on the wall that says, "You're as happy as you want to be." So we need to change. We need to think about what we're thinking about. And we can find joy, we can find peace if that's what we're looking for.
Thank you, Russ. John, would you like to piggyback on that one, or Lou, as we're running out of time here? Anything?
I like the thinking about what we're thinking about, and so many times we don't do that. And I think it was Andy Stanley who said we got to think about our stinking thinking. And so we do have the option and the choices, and John's has mentioned that quite often, and that's something I appreciate. I had to make a choice that I wanted to live. I didn't really want to die. I wanted to live, but I had to figure out how to make it through the storms. And it didn't mean all the questions were answered, but I found that path, and I found it through community. I found it through family.
Now I've got a story that I usually tell, and I don't have time to do it. But basically, it kind of is my journey of that realization that, life is not fair. You're going to have things that just aren't fair. Things are going to happen to you that maybe you didn't sign up for. Maybe you did have that contract when you came into existence, and it said that things are going to be perfect. But you're going to find out that that's not the case. And for me personally, I realized that when I was going through SEAL training early on, that life's not fair. Those instructors are mean. They're mean, and they're not fair, and they don't care. And there's nothing you can do about it. But you have to make your mind up that that's just how it is, and that you're going to have to deal with it. At least that's how I basically came out of that. And really, that is kind of one of the things that we're struggling with right now. We're dealing with something that we were powerless about. We didn't ask for it. We didn't have anything to do with it, but here it is, pretty much dominating our lives. And that's just the reality. Knowing that that's just how it is, as opposed to it's not fair, is really what's going to determine how we're going to approach this and get through it. And we will get through this, because it doesn't matter. We're going to be okay.
Thank you, John. I think we're going to end with that. I think this has been one of those very self-reflective and self-revealing panels that we've had, these webinars. I hope it's been very helpful to you. If you still have questions, please feel free to write those to Warrior to Citizen. I'd like to thank the panelists for joining us today for this stimulating discussion. Thank all of you who have tuned in today out there and have attended the webinar. Again, this was taped, and we will make this webinar available for future use. Thank you, and have a great day.